This is part 2 of an interview with Maryhannah Hansen Throm, who grew up on Divide Creek in the 1930s. This interview was recorded in November of 2012, and in part 2 of this interview, Maryhannah talks about the sense of community that people had and the sense of cooperation that got them through the hard times of the 1930s.
And for entertainment, we got together as a community on the weekends in the summer when everybody wasn't so busy working in the field they didn't have time. There were community softball games. And a lot of them were at our place because my dad had this one area that was kind of halfway flat and made a pretty good ball field. Sometimes it was kind of, hilly and bad. And the whole community would come and we'd play work-up. Or maybe we'd choose up sides and we'd have a wild softball game on Sunday afternoon.
So could anybody join in and play?
The whole neighborhood came.
Men and women?
Men and women, and little kids. We had our rules. The little kids got 4 strikes,
So it truly was a community game.
It was a community game.
You didn't go to watch an organized team. You all just got
No,
together
we never
and
went
played.
to watch. We just all got together and played softball. That's why I have all these sore fingers is from catching softball. Nobody had it. The only catcher there, the person that had mitt was the catcher. Nobody else had a mitt. Even in the school kids, we did this. At school, we did the same thing. We had a ball and a bat and a mitt, one mitt for the catcher. And everybody else just played ball.
Well, it really illustrates your point about making your own fun and your own entertainment and not having it organized.
Yeah, and then in the wintertime, we had community sleigh riding parties. And sometimes they went into the dark. There was one hill out there on Divide Creek that was pretty steep and close to the road. And everybody gathered there with their sleds and their skis and maybe a saddle horse or two, because that was the ski tow. And we'd sleigh ride all afternoon and into the evening and build a bonfire and maybe have a few. We didn't have marshmallows. You had to buy them. Then stuff you had to buy. We had a fire and kept warm by the fire and went sleigh riding together, the whole community. There'd be 15 or 20 30 people maybe out there on the hill pulling their sleds up and down, having a good time going sledding.
Now, you said the horse was the ski tow.
Sure, the saddle horse and a lariat rope, and skijoring they call it in steamboat now. Grab on the end of the rope and
they'd pull you up the hill?
Pull you up the hill or across the field or wherever, and if you let go of the rope, you fell down. Or maybe you fell down and let go of the rope. Who knows? But we did that. And then sometimes we would go to a different hill, and one of the guys had a vehicle of some description that he used to. Everybody would ski down the hill, and then we'd hook on the back of this vehicle, and he'd pull us back up the hill, and then we'd all ski back. You'd have 4 or 5 guys. You just kind of hook on each other with your ropes from the sleds. And a lot of the sleds were homemade. My dad made our sleds for us. They had a metal runner, and you guided it with your feet. It didn't guide. So when I was my brother was probably 10. And so I was probably 7. Mother and Dad, for Christmas, gave us a sled, a real live sled with a guide on it.
A radio flyer.
Radio flyer, you got that. It was a radio flyer, and we named it Charlie. And man, it was the fastest sled on the hill. We could outrun everybody, and we shared it. It was one sled for the 2 of us for Christmas. That was our Christmas present.
Well, and that was 1934 or so.
Yes.
So that was still hard times, so that was quite the present, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. My mother and Dad forego their tobacco for that week to buy that sled. I think it cost all of $3 or something like that, was under $5.
Should have called it Smokey instead of
We
Charlie.
No, we didn't. We called. And then after so many years, something happened to it, and one of the metal runners got broken, and my dad fixed it. He spliced it with metal so we could still ride it and fix it for us. He fixed things for us.
Kind of like your granddad. Could fix about anything. That was the other thing, is you usually had a shop.
Yes.
Welding and...
Oh, yeah. My favorite place to play was in Dad's shop. He had a big old forge, and he'd light a fire in there, and you could turn it, and then we could get the fire going in there, and he'd heat, because he did his own blacksmithing, some of it, and did that, and horseshoes and all that sort of stuff.
Well,
and fixed the machinery.
They had to make...
Worked on the machinery, all made pieces
make
and worked
parts.
on it and saved parts and did that. And then my dad was a fair carpenter. He remodeled the kitchen for Mother and put in new cupboards for her, and fixed that and closed up a little area and made the second bedroom. There were 5 of us kids, and we had 2 bedrooms and an outside john.
So
tight
quarters.
Well, we spent most of our time outside. Yeah. And we, of course, the other thing that we didn't have that we have now is the candy. So there's candy in the candy dish. We made a batch of fudge once in a while, and we ate it all right away. Or Mother would make honey taffy. They had bees right by this big orchard that I told you about. And the bees, of course, worked the alfalfa and the clover and the stuff. And then every fall, he would give Mother 5 gallons of honey. That was the pay for having the bees there.
5
People
gallons.
didn't deal in money. They dealt in, there was a lot of
commodities, food.
A lot of commodities. So then she'd use that honey, and she made pies. And we'd make honey taffy and pull it, and make. And that must have been good. By the time we kids got through, I don't know whether it was fit to eat or not, but we ate.
Pulling it and handling it.
I don't know. Sometimes I think about. So I don't know why I'm not dead. Everything I did was wrong.
Yeah,
I ate all the wrong things. It was good food, but we didn't worry too much about germs.
Oh, yeah. Well, you were immune because you were in the middle of all of that.
Well, and I think sometimes that's what makes us tougher. I think we developed an immune system.
Definitely.
That probably is serving us well.
Well, and you were surrounded by animals and birds
birds and an outside john. Who ever heard of washing your hands after you went to the bathroom? There wasn't any water. You had to pump it up after the out of the cistern and take it in the house to heat it up. I mean, who's going to go in there? Who's going to tromp in the house? Mother will yell at you for coming into your muddy feet if you go in there to wash your hands.
Oh yeah.
It's a whole different way of doing things.
So you talk about this cooperative community of fun. Did people get together to help one another when it came to harvest?
Oh, yes. Tell me
about that.
Well, there was one guy out there who had a thrashing machine, and I don't know where he got it, but he had it. And he went around, you've probably heard stories about the thrashers coming. And he would, whenever he was at our place, to thrash the grain that my parents, then all of the women got together and they cooked for all of the guys that would be there doing this.
So there was a scheduled, he would make his rounds.
He'd make his rounds.
And you knew where he was going to be on
where
a
he was
given
going
week.
to be in. And then the women would make, and they had fun doing it, and it was like a big harvest thing.
So all the neighbor farm women would come together, and the guys would help.
When the guys would work out and shovel the grain and put they already had it cut and shucked, and not shucked, what do they call it? What do they call that? When they pull it up in the piles?
Stacked.
No, not stacked. There's another word. I lost the word.
I never had it.
Shock. and had it in shocks.
Shocks.
In
There it is.
there you go. And then they'd go on. The guys would go with their teams mostly, because we didn't have tractors. We never had a tractor till I left. I was grown and gone before my parents ever got a tractor. We did it with horses, and then horses and wagons, and they'd go take this over to the thresher and run it through, and then someone else would be there with the wagon, with the lumber wagon, to catch the grain out as it came out of the thrashing machine and haul it to the granary, and that was just a thing. And then they'd come in and they'd eat tons of food because they were hungry, and it was in the fall and it was still warm, and so they'd eat tons of food, and the women would have pies and meat and everything all fixed up.
I never quite understood that, to eat that kind of food in the middle of the day and then go back out into the heat of the day and work.
I always took a time off.
They would find me over under a tree.
No, there would be there was time out under a tree.
Was there? So they had
always was a break after you ate.
Oh, so they got a little nap, a little time to just kind of let it.
To just kind of let the food.
What?
I don't.
3 hours, 4 hours?
Not a break.
I'm kidding.
Would you be 30 minutes?
30 minutes, okay.
Maybe 45. Everybody up and at 'em again. Because when I worked in the hayfield, the same thing. But there was always a break after you ate. Everybody could, and mostly we'd just lie out in the shade somewhere, find a shady spot, and stretch out. There was no air conditioned house to go into,
Yeah.
That was not heard of. But we always took a break. That Divide Creek community, the old-timers are still close. There's a closeness that came out of that time, the fact probably that none of us had a nickel, and so we were forced to make our own fun and do our own things together, and the fact that it was just a whole different culture. Those people are still close. When one of the old-timers passes away, they come from all over. It's amazing. If there anyone within from Grand Junction, Glenwood Springs, Denver, when my brother passes away, there'll be people come to his funeral from all over. He's one of the old Divide Creek people. There's a close-knitness about that family. And the only place I get any sense of that is in my church. That's why one of the reasons I still go, besides that I think it's the lifestyle I like, is that I get some of that sense of support and community that we had.
That was part 2 of an interview that I did with Maryhannah Hansen Throm in November of 2012. To listen to part 3, in which Maryhannah talks about how her family and others reached out to those in need during the hard times of the 1930s, please go to part 3.